What's up, YouTube? Ryan Panny here, coming at you with, I'm pretty sure, the first completely non-music related video that I've done on this channel. And of course, the irony is so thick because this is the video that I've been the most excited to shoot recently because it's a topic that just fascinates me. And it's a topic that, unlike reviewing one single music release that people may or may not have heard of or care about, it's a topic that is of at least some relevance to every single American, not to mention of interest to people around the world. And that is conspiracy theories. The book that I'm going to be reviewing today is called Real Enemies: Conspiracy Theories in American Democracy, World War I to 9/11. And it's written by Kathryn Olmstead, who is a very well-respected history scholar. A lot of her work involves things like government secrecy and espionage and Watergate and the Red Scare, so it's pretty safe to say that this kind of stuff would fall within her realm of expertise. So what drew me to this book, just flipping through it in the library a few weeks ago, is that it takes this often sensationalized, almost like taboo topic of conspiracy theories and takes a refreshing academic, fact-based approach to it. This is not Jesse Ventura or Alex Jones or some YouTube documentary about the Illuminati killing Michael Jackson. This thing has the bibliography of a fucking dissertation, practically. At the end of this book, there's 20 additional pages of vetted references and just additional material for you to go through. And despite its title, which might be a little bit misleading, this book is actually completely neutral on the theories themselves. Olmstead takes an unbiased, objective approach here because the point of this book is not to argue whether there was a second shooter when JFK was killed or if 9/11 was a controlled demolition or whatever. The point of this book is an interrogation into how the US government, by being secretive and carrying out real, historically proven conspiracies, has, as a result, perpetuated this culture of pathological paranoia and distrust amongst its own citizens. In other words, regardless of what you think happened on 9/11, what were the proven concrete ways in which the Bush administration lied to its own citizens? And how then does that perpetuate people asking more intense questions like, was it a controlled demolition, or was there drone swapping into the CIA known in advance, etc., etc.? And what Olmstead does is take us through one by one these different eras in American history, whether it was entry into World War I or Pearl Harbor or the Red Scare or JFK or Watergate or 9/11, and discuss the real, historically undisputed conspiracies that the government carried out during these times. And then she weaves together this narrative of, okay, now that we know the real conspiracies that happened, what were all the different conclusions that all these conspiracy theorists drew about these events? And why might they have come to those conclusions? Basically, there's a three-part thesis that Olmstead lays out at the very end of the book, and here it is. From World War I to the present, US government actions have helped to create conspiracy theories in three ways. First, officials often promoted conspiracy theories of their own. Second, government officials provided fodder for conspiracism by using their powers to plot and conceal real conspiracies. And third, public officials have fed citizens' anti-government paranoia by actively suppressing alternative views. So those are the three running themes of the book, and they are affirmed again and again, convincingly and repeatedly with each era that she discusses. So it was just really refreshing to get this completely fact-based, relatively unbiased look into these different conspiracy theories that otherwise too often will just devolve into these nasty internet arguments and red pill this and blue pill that. And I just enjoyed sitting back, putting my personal views aside and just soaking up factual information rather than just listening to two opposing sides arguing through either the lens of naive optimism or just pathological cynicism. And with this review, I'm not going to get into any of my personal views on these topics. They're definitely intense, complex, fascinating discussions that at some point I really look forward to having on this channel. But this is more of a historical work, so I don't think that my own views on any of these events are necessarily relevant. So I learned a fucking shit ton from this book. I gained a lot of new perspective on these events and on the American government. And what I like to do is just share some of my favorite anecdotes and some of the most interesting things that I learned to help you decide whether this is a book that you'd want to read. Because I'll tell you right now, I fucking love the book. It was right up my alley and I'd recommend it. But it's not necessarily going to be for everyone. First off, perhaps the most insightful and the most novel concept that this book presented to me was this idea of the official conspiracy theory versus the alternative conspiracy theory. Because you see, the term conspiracy theory has purposely been made to be so derogatory that I never stopped to think that, wait a minute, if my own government is proposing some idea about a foreign nation that hasn't been proven, then that's a conspiracy theory too. And it seems obvious, but I just never thought of it that way. So basically what this means is that an official conspiracy theory is any theory that's perpetuated by the government themselves. So like using 9/11 as a perfect example. Despite there being zero evidence, the US government propagated the idea that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11. There was no fucking evidence of that. Yet because the government said it, people bought it. In fact, here's something that'll blow your mind. From September 2001 to September 2003, the number of Americans who blamed Saddam for 9/11, it went from 3% to 70%. No evidence. Just your government telling you that they think something might have happened. That's it. And that blew my mind. Then, on the other hand, an alternative conspiracy theory would just be anybody else's theories about 9/11. Whether it be the 9/11 truthers who think that the towers came down from a controlled demolition, or more moderate theorists who just believe that the CIA knew in advance and let the attacks happen in Pearl Harbor fashion. Any of those theories would be alternative theories. So what Olmstead discusses here is how the government has contributed to this conspiracy culture by first promoting their own theories and then suppressing all these alternative theories. It's something that, I guess it seems simple now, but I had never really conceptualized. And I mean, for God's sake, it applies so much now in 2017, the whole Russian interference in the election and Trump's being wiretapped and Hillary's a baby rapist. Like a lot of these theories are coming from high up. They're not just like some college kid in his dorm room making a documentary. And I suppose that anything that Trump says right now that comes from his administration is now an official conspiracy theory. Another thing that fascinated me was the creation history of the CIA and how originally President Truman, at least he said, just created it as a way to compete with Russia during the Cold War, who of course everybody thought were spying on them. So now we're going to create our own spy agency that's independent of the US government, and their covert actions are going to be known by pretty much nobody except for maybe a few high up government officials. And because the CIA was this sketchy kind of independent entity, you have the unbelievable irony of situations like the CIA hiring mobsters to try to kill Castro, where literally you cannot make this shit up. On one hand, the FBI, which is a government agency, is actively hunting down mobsters like Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficante. And on the other hand, the CIA is literally hiring them to commit crimes. It's absurd. And one of the whole points of this book is that as an American, when you learn about shit like this happening in your government, you can't help but start to lose trust and start to become skeptical. Your mind starts to wander, like what kind of shady shit is the CIA doing now if they were capable of X, Y, and Z 50 years ago? You really start to think. But to be fair to the CIA, the FBI has had agendas that to me are just as alarming. I was particularly disturbed in this book to learn about, I mean, I guess this is like common knowledge, but I mean, what US history class in like your sophomore year of high school is going to teach you this shit, right? So I'm learning it for the first time. I was particularly disturbed to learn about J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI at the time. He had his agents covertly wiretap and harass and just do everything in their power to try to take down Martin Luther King at the height of the civil rights movement. And all their efforts culminated in Hoover literally sending a letter to Martin Luther King. First, he sent evidence of his extramarital affairs, and the letter basically encouraged him to just kill himself. To me, that's fucking unbelievable. Then there's the JFK situation, which is obviously one of the most widely discussed and debated conspiracy theories of all time. Going back to Olmstead's original thesis about the government carrying out its own conspiracies, regardless of who you think shot Kennedy, the one conspiracy that is 100% true that did happen is that in the wake of his assassination, government officials like Lyndon Johnson and Earl Warren and Hoover actively worked to hide the truth about US foreign policy towards Cuba, which completely obscured the context of JFK's assassination. So indirectly, these officials did lie to the American people about the assassination as a whole. So if they're gonna lie about shit like that, it's no shock to me that people don't believe the lone gunman theory. And you know, not surprisingly, by the end of 1976, only 5%, 1 in 20 people believed the official government versions of JFK and Martin Luther King. That figure should tell you a lot, especially because just learning a fraction of the truth about what their government was capable of perpetuated that. People didn't just draw these conclusions out of thin air. There had to be something that sparked a distrust. I was just continually blown away by some of the shit that the government, and the CIA especially, has done in secret. It's a little scary. Like there's this shit where the CIA was experimenting with mind control. And in collaboration with a government agency, the Bureau of Narcotics, they carried out, it was called Operation Midnight Climax. And what they did is they had prostitutes dropping LSD and other mind-altering drugs into their customers' drinks, unwillingly, and then they would just sit there and study them. Like, how much more illegal can a government operation get? And to take it a step further, in this one related program, there was the CIA employee whose name was Frank Olson. You can Google him. He was secretly dosed with LSD and he started to have these terrible hallucinations. And while they were studying him, he killed himself as a result of just going insane from, I guess, a bad trip. Now, that is manslaughter being carried out by a covert government agency against its own citizens. So you totally see how American distrust of government has been validated time and time again as people learn about very real conspiracies that happened. By the same token though, Olmstead does discuss repeatedly how people's receptiveness to all these anti-government conspiracies is highly influenced by just the general political atmosphere of the moment. Like a couple years post JFK is one of the real instances where just skepticism soared, and with that skepticism, alternative conspiracy theories. So the general political atmosphere does influence these things popping up. And to be fair, she does highlight this American fear of secret government plotters, her words, as another thing that can be manipulated just as easily as people who trust their government. Like she goes into some of the more fanatical Dealey Plaza irregulars, which was the term for the JFK conspiracy theorists. Like some of these people believe this guy Jim Garrison was one of the kind of the leader of that movement at the time. Some people believe this guy's theory that there were 16 gunmen who killed Kennedy from 5 directions. Like this is where you gotta be careful, because blindly following a conspiracy theorist is the same thing as just blindly trusting your government. And I think that's something that gets lost on some of the more zealous and more fanatical conspiracy theory proponents. So there's a gazillion specific details that I could get into here, but I think at this point you've got enough information to decide whether or not you'd want to read this book. Again, basically it's a 3-pronged thesis about how the US government for the last 100 years or so has contributed to this culture of paranoia and distrust in their own citizens. I think Kathryn Olmstead does a great job of weaving together a cohesive narrative in each of these chapters. She's definitely a compelling historical writer. And in general, I think she just does a great job of taking shots at both the government and some of the more fanatical conspiracy theorists. She manages to come off relatively unbiased here. So yeah, definitely check this book out if these are topics that fascinate you like they fascinate me. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, or shoot me a message so we can continue to talk music and I guess other things like this, and I'll see you guys soon.